Hello. Hello. Sorry, I am a bit late. Still kind of getting the hang of everything and making sure everything is correct. So, hi, I'm Kyle. I'm the host of Gentlemen Critics. I have some friends that also like to host and play video games with, but generally, I'm the host and I'll be the one that you'll primarily be seeing. So, today, we're going to be looking at history, specifically the fall of Rome. Now, there's a podcast that I really like. It's called Trigonometry, where they look at, society, geopolitics, history, various different things like that. And this one is covering why Rome collapsed. So I'm very interested to get into that today. We're going to be listening to Barry Strauss and really what he has to say. We're going to find out what book he's written recently and how this all really came to be. Before we get started, I did want to actually show you guys. I have here, I have an old set of revolutionary coins. I thought that would be really an interesting history thing to show you. I don't know if you've ever heard of somebody say like 2-bit. Something is 2-bit. Well, that they're not talking about tools. What they're talking about is actually the currency right here. They're talking about 2 bits, which is not worth very much. So when they say that you're a 2-bit criminal or something like that, that's really what they were referring to. Also have some paper money as well here, so I'll pull that out so you guys can take a look at that. So these are the kinds of bills that they would have in the revolutionary time. So it be look a little bit like this. So a lot less than our standard today. Really more of a certificate that somebody would be giving you. That you got to keep in mind. This comes from a time period where the actual value of something would be determined by gold or silver that it's backed by. So whenever you would have something like an actual currency in the form of paper, it's really more of a receipt, more of a guarantee that this is going to be worth by whoever is signing it what I'm saying it's worth. So very different. Nowadays, we do the same thing, but the person that's signing it is the United States government. So it's a little different, for sure. So why don't we get into it? And I will share my screen.
The empire was in terrible trouble. There were plagues, there was inflation, there were assassinations, there were revolving door emperors. You have huge extremes of wealth, and you have all these slaves as well who are skewing the economy. So these are the preconditions for a series of civil wars. They're waged on and off for nearly a century until the end of the Republic comes.
Right. Non-historians like to draw comparisons between what they see in the West today and the Roman Empire. Is there legitimacy to it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of...
Of course.
I was kind of hoping you'd say no. Barry Strauss, welcome back to Trigonometry.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, it is great to have you. We had you on about a year and a half ago. We talked about the great generals and military leaders. It wasn't an interview that did huge numbers, but it's genuinely probably one of our very absolute favorite interviews that we've ever done. And I hope more people go and watch it now that you're on. But what we want to talk to you about today is Rome, the decline and fall.
Yes.
Before we do, we might want to tell people what Rome was. What was this great civilization? What were some of the key beliefs and values? And perhaps that will lead into why.
That's actually a really good question for chat. That's something that, I'd be curious to know. How would you summarize Rome? Like if somebody said, what is Rome? How would you describe it? It's such a big question, right? Because if you don't actually know what Rome is, how would you actually end up finding that out? And it's such a big question because this is over 1,000 year. Is it 900 or 1,000 years that Rome existed? So, that's a lot of time. That is a lot of time, and they ruled pretty much most of the Western world. So it's definitely a good question. How would you describe what is Rome?
Well, Rome was a great empire. It stretched from Edinburgh all the way to Syria and Arabia, and for a short period all the way to the Persian.
Here, let's go back a little bit. So I agree. It's interesting to look at Edinburgh. specifically.
Yes.
Before we do, we might want to tell people what Rome
it's
was.
interesting
What
to
was
look
this
at
great
just how
civilization? What were
far
some of the key
Rome
beliefs and
got.
values? And perhaps that will lead into why
Sure.
eventually the decline of.
Well, Rome was a great empire. It stretched from Edinburgh all the way to.
I don't think if a lot of people realize just how big Rome really got, and why they did not take the remainder of England. So when you look at this and you see this map and you see, wow, so they ruled England. Why didn't they take Ireland? Why didn't they take Scotland? They have all of Wales and they have all of England. Well, they ran into a problem when they got up into Edinburgh. They ran into the problem of the Pikes, which are one of the few native populations of the world that still reside in their ancestral homeland. The Pikes are the native Scottish, and they're still there to this day. They were never conquered really by anybody. I mean, you can make that argument for sure that England did, and I guess to some extent maybe that's true, but it was really a lot more complicated than that. They've always sort of held their own on the world stage back in the ancient times, which is very impressive. So the emperor who did this campaign that actually got them up into England, this emperor died, and his son Hadrian was not able to. Well, I shouldn't say not able. I'm not actually sure he was really interested in expanding beyond the territory that they had gained under his father's military campaigns. But rather, Hadrian was much more interested in maintaining the borders of what they had gained. So the reasons that they did not go into Ireland or Scotland is not necessarily that they couldn't, although you can make the argument that it certainly wouldn't have been easy. But it was really more of a matter of choice that they were deciding to sort of consolidate. You know, they had clearly taken all of Gaul, which is now France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Sicily. You know, a lot of the Mediterranean pretty much ruled there. So it is a big empire, and it is a big thing to try to control that border. So I'm interested to see if he expands on any of that.
To Syria and Arabia, and for a short period, all the way to the Persian Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
The Romans were some of the greatest soldiers in history. They were conquerors.
Yep.
They were tough guys, and they conquered this empire of about 50 million people. They're also extremely good at politics, at bargaining, at making friends, at using carrots and sticks. They're ruling 50 million people. They've conquered them all. They only have 300,000 men in their army, which isn't a huge army when you have an empire that stretches 3,000 miles and 50 million people. So they had lots of revolts. They were civilized. Rome was originally a city-state, very influenced by Greek culture. And the Roman ideal was an ideal of cultivated gentlemen who were public-spirited, who were educated. Ideally, they should be wealthy. And the wealthy elite should do public service and dedicate themselves to the good of the city and their country. Mm-hmm. Citizenship was a major part of what made the Romans great. When Rome was a republic, the fact that there was a core of citizens who all had military service, who all served the republic, who'd be called on to fight for the republic, that was the basis of Roman greatness. Also, Roman government was not a democracy. It was what the ancients called a mixed regime. The Romans referred to themselves as SPQR.
Yes, they did.
Senatus Populusque Romanus. The Senate.
Turn your musical masterpiece into money. Start selling your digital creations on Shopify.
With over 2 billion monthly users, YouTube Ads makes it easy to expand your reach.
And the Roman people. They're not just the Roman people, they're the Senate and the Roman people. Senate is a word that we now have the word senility. It means elders. The Senate is the council of elders.
Quite appropriate, actually.
Yeah. These they didn't consider themselves senile, of course, but these are supposed to be the wise men. They've served in a variety of public offices. Many of them have served in more than one. And they have huge authority in guiding the Roman state. The people have assemblies. They're politicians. There are elections. The elections are raucous. They're wild. They're a bit like our elections nowadays. And so with this political system, which is
I have a feeling he's going to say this so many times during the course of this interview. He's going to say, a lot like we have today.
Very solid and very able to call on the responsibility and the loyalty of the people to fight for Rome. They also create this great army, which is flexible, it's orderly, ultimately becomes a professional army. Ultimately, Rome suffers from its success, pays the price of success, and conquering an empire turns out to be too big a burden for one small city-state in central Italy to govern. Also, all this money pouring in, huge numbers of slaves pouring in, competing with free people, free labor, which can't compete with it. Huge turmoil. The army goes from being a citizen militia to a professional army, and the soldiers go from being middle-class farmers to being poor people. The Roman word for poor people is breeders. They're mere breeders. Latin for that is proletarian. That's where we get the word proletarian from. Ultimately, these proletarians follow the strongest generals, and you get people like Marius and Sulla, and of course, Caesar. There's a series of civil wars, and when the smoke clears, Rome becomes an empire, a monarchy. It's no longer a republic. There's still a Senate, there's still citizens, there's still a sense of loyalty to the center, loyalty to the emperors, even when they're a bit wacky. But in time, Rome faces more and more pressure from invaders from abroad, from both sides of the empire. In the West, various Germanic tribes. In the East, various Iranian regimes. First the Parthians, one dynasty, and then the Sasanians, another dynasty. The pressure grows greater and greater, and the Roman Empire should have died in the year 260. That's the year that the Roman emperor is captured in battle by the Sasanian king. And the Sasanian king, to humiliate the emperor, uses him as a footstool to climb on his horse. And he carves this in a big stone relief, which you can still see in Western Iran, this humiliation of the Roman Empire. Empire is in terrible trouble. There were plagues, there was inflation, there were assassinations, there were revolving door emperors. But a series of soldier emperors, strong men, rose to the occasion. They saved the empire by making it more authoritarian, by raising taxes, by taking away freedoms, by ultimately abolishing the power of the Senate, making it more centralized. And finally, the one thing they did was they felt that the gods were no longer with them. The Romans were pagans, of course, like the Greeks.
That is such a great point, because whenever a civilization that reaches sort of the zenith, the pinnacle of the world, when a great indicator that they start to fall apart is when they start to lose their religion, when they stop having faith in a higher power. And it's not necessarily that that is so important. It's that when it comes to religion, it often has with it a set of principles and that govern the society without there needing to be a law. It's sort of this, you should morally follow these ethics. That's what religion provides. So when a society like Rome starts to get to a point where they're not really identifying with their gods anymore, they're not identifying with that set of moral values, where are they going to get that set of moral values from? Are they going to get it from anywhere, or has it just become carte blanche?
And they felt the gods are no longer with us. We either have to return to the old gods, bring back the old-time religion, or try something new. And they tried a variety of things until they finally settled on one thing: Christianity. Constantine is the first Christian emperor, and although he doesn't require that everyone become Christian, he and his successors make it pretty clear that the way to success in the Roman Empire is to become a Christian. And people will convert either out of sincere religious belief or because they think the God of the Christians must be right, because after all, look how successful it's been. And so the Roman Empire is revamped, retooled into the 300s AD with these new dynasties, but then trouble arrived.
The Bible is actually written at this point. A lot of people don't realize that for a long time after the death of Christ, nearly 200-300 years, there was no Bible. There was no basic book. So when Rome decided to really become Christian, they had the Council of Nicaea, and it took over 100 days to debate. They had a lot of things that they had to get worked out that way. Everybody was on the same page. And that is actually where we first start getting the Bible from. It comes after this time period. Now, the Quran was being thrown around, which is very similar to the Old Testament in a lot of ways. So there is a bridging of the gap between, the Jewish state that they had been becoming and really settling into after the paganism and into the Christian themes. Now, what it's interesting, he talks about that there is this not only a desire to move forward with something new, but also a desire to rekindle the past. You actually see a lot of pagan themes brought back into Christianity, a lot of focus on the solstice and various things like that, which just shows that there is just this can we make Rome great again mentality, which is what you tend to see when a society is in collapse.
The Germanic peoples in the West and in the North organized themselves. They grouped themselves into what one historian has called supergroups. Instead of being 50 different Germanic tribes, there are now really only 4 different Germanic tribes. They learned the art of war from the Romans. They covet the Roman lands. They're raiding the Roman lands. That might have been the end of the problem. The Romans might have been able to handle that, except for a couple of things. One, the Huns arrive on the scene. Attila the Hun and his warriors from the steppes arrive on the scene, and they are.
A lot of people don't understand how impactful the Huns really were on the world stage. They pushed so hard against China that we now have the Great Wall as a response to Attila the Hun. So what does he do? He said, okay, well, then I'm going to turn and I'm going to go west. And that's when he ran into the Germans. And the Germanic tribes then ran further west as well, all the way up against the borders of Rome, which creates that tension, Ooh, now we got all these Germans trying to flood in, all this immigration problem. But really, it's not that the Germans wanted to be a part of Rome. It's that they just didn't want to get murdered by the Huns. So it's really interesting he brings this up because that's not something you hear a lot of people talk about, the impact of Attila the Hun on the Roman state, because it actually had quite a bit of an impact.
Attacking the Germans in the various lands in which they live and driving them into the Roman Empire.
Exactly.
And they find themselves forced to fight the Romans, and they're very successful at defeating the Romans. Nonetheless, the Romans still have strong armies, and they still have terrific generals who might have recouped, but there are 2 other problems. We get a series of incompetent
big ideas.
Emperors.
Yep. In fact, for 50 years in the 5th century, we're now in the 400s AD, Rome is governed by these 2 incompetent emperors, 2 child emperors when they start out, boy emperors, and there's rot at the top. Second problem is that once these barbarians come and settle in the empire, and Rome's forced to let them settle in the empire, that they take away the tax base. If you don't have the tax base, people aren't paying taxes to Rome, but they're paying taxes to the barbarian chieftains instead. You can't have the professional army. So now we turn to the old Roman way of doing things. We turn to the Roman citizens, but there aren't any Roman citizens anymore. Citizenship, of course, technically they're Roman citizens, but the bond between the citizen and the state is gone. The loyalty of the citizens to the state is gone. When Rome was rising, Rome and then all Italy supplied soldiers to conquer this empire. By the time we get to the 400s AD, and well before that, there are no soldiers in Italy anymore. The Romans are becoming the Italians. They're enjoying the good life. They're not fighting. They use...
Does this not sound so familiar? Does that not sound so... Oh, by the way, that's my cat, Sebastian. Does that not sound so familiar? All of a sudden we're at the top, and we've been at the top for so long, even though we have all these problems and things that are threatening the foundation of that success. We're starting to get lazy. We're starting to get fat and happy and sitting around and just drinking the spoils of war. You can't do that when you got problems on your doorstep.
People from the outskirts of the empire, and often Germans, to do the fighting for them. So this is a ship that's very hard to turn around.
Should
In
have
fact,
never
it turns
trained the
out to be
Germans the way that they
impossible
did.
to turn around.
Created the
That's the
strongest
big
fighting
picture.
force in the world.
Well, that's so interesting, and it's a breakdown, but we want to delve into it a little bit.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things for me is it right? Am I right that the Romans had, even in the Republic period, that you could, at times of war, appoint people who were temporary dictators effectively? Is that right?
Yes.
Well, yes,
So the word the dictator is a temporary office. It's a 6-month office.
Yeah.
And when a dictator is appointed, it means that a normal Republican government stops, and the dictator has supreme power for the period of war only. So it's an office the Romans used. There's something like this in Britain in World War I when the Defense of the Realm Act was passed. And there was a sense that ordinary government business would have to be put on hold.
You know, a lot of people don't realize the United States of America has very similar laws in place. Now, they can't create a dictatorship, but in times of war, the United States government can basically sort of take control of the means of production if they want to, which is essentially very communist, very socialist idea. But this is actually a very common practice that when you start getting into a major war, it's not necessarily a dictatorship these days, but the country itself needs to get the factories rolling. They need to say, hey, I'm sorry, we're going to have to put these products and these amenities to the side because we need to make things. We need resources to be put in the right place. So we don't have a dictatorship, but never forget that the United States government during wartime has the ability to take control of the means of production.
For the sake of the country. Or in the Civil War in the United States, when President Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, and people said, you can't do that. You have no constitutional right to do that. And his answer was, I want the republic to survive. So
what's habeas corpus? What's habeas corpus? It's a fundamental legal principle, huh? Intriguing. It's a fundamental legal principle that safeguards against unlawful imprisonment. It ensures that individuals held in custody are brought before a court to determine the legality of their detention. So this is like you can't falsely imprison people? Is that what habeas corpus is? It's Latin for that you have the body. Interesting. It involves the state's ability to detain a prisoner in a valid way. So Lincoln actually said, we're going to get rid of that during the Civil War? You don't hear about that, do you? Well, that's pretty interesting.
So I'm going to have to do it.
And how did the transition happen in terms of, what was the culture and the history and the events that led up to the fact that this society, which was a republic, became, a monarchy or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. Well, I think in part, as I said, it's the problem that success spoiled the Romans. They bring in so much wealth that you have people who now feel, if I'm so wealthy and I've conquered kings abroad, why don't I get to be a king? You have a series of generals like that. You also have the problem of the poor, because another thing that the Romans get is they get slaves, massive numbers of slaves. And Roman Italy becomes one of the most egregious slave societies in history. This is a problem if you're a poor, free farmer, because you can't compete.
Just to touch on the slavery aspect, I think it's important to note that Rome has a very interesting relationship with slavery. In the beginning of Rome, when it was a republic, slavery is not at all what he's talking about right now and not what it became for them. What it became for Rome is very similar to how the United States of America did slavery, where you would own the person and the person's offspring. That actually was a very radical idea that was sort of new at the time when Rome switched to that. In the beginning, slavery would have been preferable to being at the very, very bottom of society in a lot of ways in the Republic of Rome. You would have had guaranteed room and board, guaranteed housing, and depending on the stature of the person that you were indentured to, you actually would hold some form of societal authority yourself just by being involved with them. Now, what he's talking about as Rome becomes more authoritative and is starting to lose its morals and values and starts becoming a Christian state, they started doing what is a lot more similar to the transatlantic slave trade that we saw in the West.
With this slave labor anymore. And there are some very unscrupulous wealthy people who are snatching up the common land that's needed for poor people to pasture their sheep and cattle and goats on. That disappears as well. And in some cases, they confiscate the farms of the ordinary people and the poor. So
I believe the same thing
you
is
have
happening in the United States of America.
huge extremes of wealth, very, very wealthy people who have ambitions beyond those of their fathers and grandfathers. You have very poor people who are looking for some way to make a living. And you have all these slaves as well who are skewing the economy. So these are the preconditions for a series of civil wars that they're waged on and off for nearly a century.
Oh gosh, what did we have?
Until
We have like
the
8
end of
different
the Republic
emperors
comes.
in like
And
100 years.
a lot
or
of people
something.
listening to what you just listed
Uh-huh.
might be thinking, that sounds a little bit familiar. I mean, we have in our societies extreme
Oh,
wealth inequality. You might say we have a slave class, which is illegal, often immigrants or
Right,
new immigrants who are being paid in a way that means they're the local.
Just an FYI for anybody who's not ever watched trigonometry before, that is Constantine. He is a comedian, but he also writes a lot of books, gives speeches to Parliament. Very, very intelligent man. This is his friend Francis, who is the child of Venezuelan immigrants, and he has seen firsthand exactly the detriment that socialism can do. You know, because Venezuela switched to a socialist society, which led to a lot of bad stuff. Specifically, his mother was falsely imprisoned. Now she is out now, and I believe they live in Britain. But she was falsely imprisoned for a long time, and that'll really mess you up. You know, so he has a very specific idea. You'll hear that when Francis asks questions. He has that perspective. It's a very unique immigrant story. It's not an immigrant story of, oh, you know, I'm just going to come for the land of opportunity. It's I'm fleeing what the horrors of socialism can really be. And I'm trying to get to a capitalist society that I can actually earn my way in and, you know, have some protections.
Population can't compete. We're fat and wealthy. You've got these billionaires who are, you know, wealthy beyond the aspirations of any human in history, etc. And non-historians like to draw comparisons between what they see in the West today and the Roman Empire. Is there legitimacy to that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of
I was kind of hoping you'd say no, but I'm
sorry. I have to agree with you. You know, one of the lessons of the Roman Empire is that societies with strong citizenship can weather the storm. And once that bond goes, they're in deep, deep trouble. So earlier on in the 3rd century BC, when Hannibal invaded Roman Italy and inflicted some of the worst defeats in war that the Romans ever had.
You see the mountains? That man, Hannibal, he took those elephants over the Swiss Alps. He took the elephants over the mountains. Crazy.
The Romans are able to bounce back because they have this strong citizenry, and they also have a series of alliances with people in Italy, especially in central Italy. The Romans are very good at making deals, at saying one hand washes the other. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And they're quite good at making ties with these citizens. The Romans, with these allies. They're good at making ties with these allies. One of the things that the Romans do, so the Romans come in and they conquer you, and they say, who are the wealthy people in town? Who are the important, wealthy, influential people in town? They say, look, you didn't want to lose the war, but you lost. And we're going to confiscate 10% of your land. But I'll tell you what, if you behave, we'll let your sons marry Roman women, and their children can become Roman citizens. And we'll let you and people like you in your country, we'll let you do business with Rome without paying any extra taxes. We'll give you privileges. The Romans are very clever at this. They're very clever at co-op.
Alexander the Great did very similar things when they were conquering the Persian lands. People often think when you conquer a land that you just kind of kill everybody and you take over and then you rule by authority. But the most successful civilizations in terms of conquering land once they win the battle, they then integrate that society into their own. It's very important. It's another issue when it comes to immigration that a lot of people don't understand. They think you just let somebody in and they'll enhance your society. But if there isn't an integration into that society first, then you're just kind of asking for trouble.
Opting people. So they build these bonds of loyalty that hold the empire together. But citizenship is the core of it.
And isn't the problem, though, is that you keep granting more and more people citizenship, you dilute the meaning of citizenship.
Yes, they do. And that's very insightful. So in the beginning of the 3rd century, I think,
being from Venezuela and having watched everything that happened to his poor country and having lost its national identity, he probably, it's not just a theory, you know, Francis has seen it firsthand. Like, if you let people come in that don't have a pride or a care for your society and its values, and they just want to live in it and introduce their own values into your already existing society, tension, and it dilutes what it means to be British. If you think about it, for example, if you let in so many French people that there was a huge population of London was now French people, almost the same as English people, would it still be as British? Absolutely not. You know, it would change. It would start to intermingle, and there would be a lot of French values that would work its way in there. That's what I think he's getting at. Rome did this over time. They just sort of allowed people to come in and bring their own cultures. And take America, for example, with like Ellis Island. That's the best way I've seen somebody do it. Because you do want to have immigration and you do need new ideas, but you need to have sort of a way station where you can make a determination about whether or not the people that are coming through that immigration are actually going to contribute to that society, or are they going to be against what that society stands for. And obviously Rome is now bringing in German barbarians who don't care about Roman values at all. They just don't want to get killed by the Huns.
The year is 212. The Roman emperor decides, you know, we've been giving citizenship, we've been doling out a little bit more over the years. Let's cut to the chase and make everybody Roman citizens, and they're all going to have to pay taxes now. Mm-hmm. But it's diluted. Now that everyone's a Roman citizen, and also it loses its meaning. And in fact, the Romans come up with a new distinction, because I want to have distinctions between the greater people and the lesser people. I'll translate that as, and that replaces, in a way, the distinction between citizen and non-citizen.
I feel like one of the hardest things to do in an office is translate what you actually want to say.
You already have a system where, you know, there's citizens and non-citizens.
And so the distinction between a citizen and non-citizen is what do you get as a citizen, what do you get as a non-citizen? Because also the problem comes, Barry, is that I imagine if there is no pathway for a non-citizen to become a citizen, the problem is that you're going to get resentment, anger, frustration, social instability.
You do, but the Romans are rather elitist people, and they can't imagine how you can have a society where everybody shares in the privileges. They think that it makes society more effective if you dole out the privileges little by little, and that's how you get people to buy into the system and to work for you. But an example of answer your question, what do you get? So St. Paul, he's in Judea. He gets in trouble with the authorities. They're putting him on trial, and he says, "Civis Romanus sum." I am a Roman citizen, which he was. And that entitled him to a trial in Rome. So he goes to Rome. So it means you're going to be treated better than someone who's not a Roman citizen. If you're punished, you can't be whipped. You can't be crucified if you're a Roman citizen. You have to get better treatment, and you have certain tax privileges as well.
And when we're talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, and we talked about many things, what about corruption? Because corruption seems to me, as I've seen a society fall in Venezuela, and corruption was the main reason why it fell.
No, corruption's not. I mean, you're right. There was corruption in the Roman Empire, but corruption was endemic to ancient governments, as is probably endemic to all governments. There's no reason to think there was more corruption in the 400s AD than there had been earlier. So I don't think corruption was the reason for the fall of the empire. I would say much more the loosening of the social bonds, the loosening of the notion of citizenship and citizen responsibility.
Because there's people who frequently talk about the collapse of the Roman Empire, and we're talking about corruption. This is a point where the foamy-mouthed conservative smashes the table, and they're having too much sex with the wrong people. That's why it all went wrong.
Yeah, but they've been doing that for hundreds of years, and they had their empire. So I don't think we can say that.
Oh, really? Because there's also other people who go, well, it's all about once a society starts playing with gender, that's a sign that it's in terminal decline. Is that another conservative fallacy?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the Romans will only tolerate so much of this. So when you get someone like Nero, who's playing very interesting games, he offends Roman sensibilities. He offends the conservative morality of Roman society.
I don't even want to talk about Nero.
There's a bunch of things he does, and ultimately he is informed that he should commit suicide. That would be the honorable way out. He's forced to do it. But I don't think the case of Rome is a case that these people were sexually corrupt, and that's why the Roman Empire fell.
Gentlemen, there's a new standard in grooming. The white hot lawnmower 5.0 Ultra from Manscaped doesn't just look cool, it's built for precision and comfort, especially where it counts. It's got service standards are second to none. Go to manscaped.com, use code TRIGGER15
And what were the Roman moral sensibilities around sex, sexuality, women, etc.?
Well, they were pagans. So, I mean, on the one hand, they can be pretty conservative. They have nuclear families. They have clans as well. On the other hand, and women were, had to be chaste or they couldn't be married. But on the other hand, they had the double standard. Roman men could fool around just as long as they weren't fooling around with someone else's wife, especially not another citizen's wife.
So they're Italian, basically.
They're Mediterranean. This is a Mediterranean society.
Yes, well said.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And in what other ways? What I'm really curious about, Barry, is to try and understand. We do this in the modern world too. There's this thing called mirror image bias, where we assume that everyone's like us.
That's right. Yes.
But I imagine the Romans, as a culture, were quite, even though we are to a large extent descended from them, were quite different to us. What would you say are the key differences about the way they thought about things in the world and all sorts of things?
Well, some key differences. First of all, family was much more important to the Romans than it was to us. And your ancestors were much more important to the Romans than they are to us. The wealthiest Romans, when a member of the family died, maybe just the men, they would make a wax effigy, a funeral wax, and they kept these effigies in special closets to keep them cool in their houses. And whenever there was a new funeral in the family, they would parade these effigies of the great ancestors who were dead, who had died. So the wealthiest Romans had this sense of ancestral responsibility.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And ancestral pride in their family. Honor was immensely important for the Romans in a way that it's not for us. I mean, we talk about reputation.
Honor used to be important to us.
I think even reputation has faded a bit in our society from what it was 100 years ago.
Yep.
But honor was immensely important for the Romans. Authority. So in our society, in our political system, we have constitutions, we have laws, we have traditions. The Romans had all that, but they also had something called auctoritas, from which we get our word authority. But this is authority on steroids, auctoritas. Auctoritas is the honor and respect you pay to someone, not because of the legal power that person has, but because that person is great and noble and powerful. So the Roman Senate, for instance, had very little.
You judge someone on the content of their character, not a superficial idea like the color of their skin or their societal standing or how much money they had. I like to think that is probably the best way to make those kinds of judgments in society, is to judge someone, if you're going to, off of their character.
Limited legal power. But in the Republic, it was all powerful because of its auctoritas. It was understood that these were people that you needed to respect, you needed to pay attention to. Now, of course, having a system like that, originally there are 300 senators, and there was one point there's as many as 900. Having a system like that, of course, is anti-democratic, and it is elitist. That's the bad side. The good side of it is that you get a number of people to buy into responsibility. And here you have all these wealthy people who are not saying, what I really only care about is my corporation. They're saying, I care about the government. It's important that I be part of the ruling group of the state. And societies that have an institution like that really have a leg up, because you have these people who are responsible. They're not going to go cultivate their own gardens. They're going to be public spirited. Another factor that makes the Romans different from us is their system of clientage. So Roman society has been described as a pyramid, or a series of pyramid, and it gets narrower as you go up. At the top are a few very wealthy people. And as you go down the pyramid, you get, of course, poorer and poorer people. Everyone in Roman society has a patron. And everyone in Roman society, with the exception of the emperor, is a client, is somebody's client. And it was felt that the responsibility of clients to their patrons and vice versa was sacred. So how would it work? Okay, so you're a Roman senator, and you're going to want to go out to the forum, and you want to make an impression. Your clients are expected to accompany you. They might even have to be there when you wake up in the morning, like Louis XIV. La levée du roi. There was something like that in Rome, that you would be there for the senator or the emperor. And if you have a case in court, your client is supposed to be there to cheer for you. If you're running for public office, your client is supposed to support you and get other people who support you. The other side of the coin is, what happens if there's a crop failure and your clients are starving? You as a patron are expected to take care of your clients. So it's a much more vertical society than ours. It's a much less egalitarian society than ours. But there is a society with all these ties.
Barry, was there a central myth to Rome in the same way that there's a central myth for America? The American dream, that anyone can come, they can make it if you only work hard enough and you believe in yourself and your abilities. Did Rome have that?
That did not used to be a myth. There is so many Irish immigrants that will tell you that they achieved the American dream.
Yes, not that anyone could make it and anyone could be rich, but that Rome had a destiny. Rome had a destiny to rule the world.
Yeah, I've heard
to
of that
tame
before,
the
actually.
proud, as one Roman poet said.
What are their manifest destiny to eventually rule the world? And Rome would be the
to teach laws to other people. So there was a sense that Rome was greatness. And if you wanted to buy into this greatness, you wanted to become a Roman citizen, and you wanted to be part of this great enterprise. There, as I said, there were all these rebels. There are lots of rebellions against the Roman Empire. People who are not.
In a lot of way, Rome was a brand, and it sort of was like a Nike logo you'd want to put on your shirt, and you wanted to be a part of it. That's what Rome was. But they didn't stand for fitness. They didn't stand for running or, anything like that. They stood for power, greatness. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I have heard that many times, actually, that's really, some argue whether or not it ever even really existed, or if the entire idea of Rome from the beginning is the thing that precipitated it. The idea that they were great, and so they needed to continue to be great, is sort of the idea behind it. It's really interesting. Whereas we're the land of opportunity.
But there are a lot of people who think it's not just that the Romans are powerful; they're great. Look at what they've achieved. Look at their army, which is like no army that the world had seen before. Look at the city. Very early on, they think of Rome as the eternal city. So
hey, it's still here today.
That, the Roman dream, everybody gets to have a house in the suburbs and 2 cars in the garages, but rather that if you buy into Rome, if you become part of Rome, you become part of this greatness. I think that's a big part of it.
And sorry to jump in, Francis. Yeah. I'm curious. This idea of Rome being essentially bringing civilization to other people.
Right. Yeah.
Was this accurate? Were the people that they were conquering really quite inferior to them? You know, technologically, culturally, militarily, etc.
They were militarily inferior.
Yeah, I don't know.
They weren't technologically or culturally inferior. And some
really,
well, technologically, the Romans had a few things that others didn't. They were incredible road builders. And the Romans, to take the technology of the dome, I don't know if they invented it or not, but they take it to
Probably
places
not.
where it hasn't been before.
The Greeks did.
Roman law, it's not as if the Romans are the only people in the ancient world, but the Roman law code becomes particularly orderly and codified. I would say the one thing the Romans have over others is they just have this fantastic military, and they have a political system that's...
But why? You're not explaining why they had a fantastic military. You're not explaining that properly. Rome had the ability to do something very, very special and very, very unique. A lot of people think aqueducts. They think Rome. Not true. The Etruscans, the people who enslaved Rome and they rebelled against, built the first aqueducts. Now, Rome improved upon the aqueducts, but that's the point I'm trying to make. So the true superpower that Rome had was they could take something someone else invented and make it better. They could replicate a military strategy, architectural feat, and they could improve upon it. That is essentially the superpower of Rome. When you look at a Roman legion, you're looking at the combination of the various different Greek city-states and their military strategies combined with this brutality that they had to develop, mixed with Etruscan themes. Like they are a hodgepodge of various different things. Rome is like a blob that just absorbs and gets bigger. That's what Rome's superpower was. So yes, they had the greatest military the world had ever seen up to that point. That's just because anybody they ever fought, they took the best aspects of your military, improved upon them, and threw them back in your face.
Immensely flexible, and that draws on the loyalty of its own people, and that is able to make ties, make new friends in the places that the Romans conquer. Romans are very good at this. These are not Nazis coming in jackboots and killing everyone, although the Romans are capable of genocide if absolutely necessary. But we've had to do things nice. We don't have to do things nasty. Unless you really have to. We're civilized cigarette. No, that's the Romans. They do engage in genocide from time to time. But
well, Carthage would be one example, right?
Carthage,
oh my
Jerusalem,
God, yeah, Carthage doesn't even exist anymore.
There's quite a few then.
There's quite a few. There's a small city in Italy whose name is escaping me. I'll come back to me. Early on, Numantia in Spain. When the Romans conquer Gaul, Caesar brags that he's killed 1 million people and enslaved 1 million people. Gesundheit. But that's probably a vast exaggeration. So maybe he's only killed 100,000 and enslaved 100,000.
And why did he do that? Was it because they resisted as much as they did?
They resisted, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the Mongols. Like if you don't resist us, we will tax you and leave you be, basically.
Yes.
But if you resist us, we're going to slaughter you.
That's right.
And is that how basically warfare was always conducted in those times, or is that quite an original, unique, unusual?
If you're fighting war against people who you consider your kin, like the ancient Greek city-states, in general, no. In general, war was, I wouldn't say it's bloodless, but the casualties are much smaller. The wars typically are fought by battles on just one day.
I would actually really press against that. I would actually make the argument that we have seen throughout history that when two sides are like very aware of each other, they really know each other, there's a kinship between them, the brutality of the fighting, it can actually reach a higher level. And I'm going to theorize about why that could be true. My thought process is when you're going into war, you can kind of tell yourself, as a human being. I'm at war right now. I'm going to do things that are atrocious and that are not a reflection of me as a person, but of what I have to do for what I believe in. Now, that's not always the case. That's a very American view of why you would want to go to war. But I'm sure that the Romans had very similar ideas behind the concept. But when you're going up against someone that you might potentially know, in order to push through that, in order to get to a point where you could fight that person on the battlefield, you have to let more of yourself go than you normally would have in order to simply engage in warfare in the first place. And when you let a lot of your morals and ethics and values go in order to engage in that warfare, it tends to be a lot bloodier, tends to be a lot more brutal.
Battles. It was much more civilized. It was much more like an athletic game, like an athletic competition, like a sport. If you're fighting people who you consider to be inferior to you, then the knives come out. And we see that again and again. So Alexander the Great, for instance, when he invades Central Asia and India, he engages in a kind of atrocities he hadn't engaged in by and large further west, although he did engage in some atrocities there as well.
Barry, did this change when
I don't agree? I do not agree with that assessment. I do not agree with that assessment because one, that wasn't Alexander the Great. That would have been his generals. Let's not even put that on him. For real. Let's not even really put that on Alexander the Great, who routinely had to tell his generals to calm down. So let's not put that on him. I think that there is something to be said for part of what he's saying. I don't think that having a familiarity with somebody is going to make you be more civil. I can't speak on this exact conflict. I'm not incredibly well versed in it. But if you're going to talk about, people who see the person they're fighting as inferior to them, are they more likely to commit atrocities? Well, yes, I would say that the kind of person that views other human beings as inferior to them, period, are capable of more atrocities than someone else. So I don't know if I really think that's. I'm not sure I really agree with him on that.
Roman Empire turned into the Holy Roman Empire, because obviously the religion of Mars and the other gods is very, very different to the religion of Jesus Christ and Christianity.
Right. Well, really good question. Edward Gibbon, who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire in the 18th century, famously says that the empire was ruined by barbarism and religion. He blames Christianity for turning the Romans soft and making them incapable of resisting. This is nonsense for a bunch of reasons. I agree with that at all. First of all, the entire Roman Empire was converted to Christianity, with a few pockets that weren't, but the whole thing was. The most Christian part of the empire is the eastern part of the empire. That's where Christianity has its deepest roots. That's the part of the empire that's not conquered by the barbarians. That's the part of the empire that survives. So if Christianity makes people weak, it makes them only selectively weak. It only makes them weak in the West, not weak in the East. For another thing, Christianity was a fighting faith.
Have you ever heard content creators say, comment the word burgers below and I'll send you over something for free? And then when you comment the word burgers, you instantly receive a DM automatically within just a few seconds? The way they do this is with a tool called ManyChat. Now, the crazy thing about using this tool is that this generates way more comments on your videos, which in turn will get Instagram to push.
Christian language in the later Roman Empire is infused with militarism, and the idea of Christian soldiers as soldiers of Christ is a very big metaphor.
Well, let's pause on that. I'm gonna go get another drink. But I mean, gosh, the bedrock for the Crusades starts in the Roman Empire before it even falls. I completely agree with that statement. I mean, because the Crusades are a whole other video that I could do. We could get into the 3 different Crusades, what they were really after. That's a whole other topic. But yes, the bedrock foundation of the Crusades definitely starts in the conversion of the Roman Empire into a Christian empire, converting one of the world's largest military forces into a Christian empire that falls leaves that vacuum in people's minds and in their hearts of, well, my ancestor was a part of this great Christian empire that was sacked by these, these barbarians, these people that didn't have this respect for Christianity. That absolutely, and then they just sort of transplanted their feelings for the barbarians onto the Arabs. It was, there's a lot more I could go into. That's a whole other video. I will be right back. So are we about halfway? Yep, we are at just about the halfway point. Wow, does that mean I've talked for 26 minutes more than the video's gone on for? Okay. Oh, goodness.
So the Roman Christians absorbed the militarism of pagan Roman society. So I don't think Christianity has anything to do with the fall of the empire.
And when did it move from...
Does Christianity have anything to do with the fall of the Roman Empire? I guess in a very broad sense, I would agree with him. The answer is no. In a very broad sense. But if you're really going to look at like the deep of it all, and is this related to one thing related to the other? I mean, obviously that, the religious aspect of what was going on inside the empire 100% had some impact. Now the degree of impact, that's a whole other conversation, but I do think you have to admit it had some impact for sure.
Rome to Constantinople.
Okay, great question. So Constantine the Great, the first Christian emperor, even before him, the Romans had realized that the burdens of running this empire, I mean, it's a big empire, 3,000 miles with pre-modern technology, and that's facing attacks on two frontiers, both east and west. It's too much for any one individual. So they decide they will split it, and they have emperors in the east and the west. Constantine doesn't. He wants to rule the whole shebang. But more and more, they're dividing the empire. And ultimately, by the end of the 4th century, the empire is now permanently divided between Eastern emperor and a Western empire. Constantine creates the city of Constantinople. Constantinople means Constantine city. He names it after himself, as many emperors made cities they named after themselves.
Modern day Istanbul,
it becomes
by the way.
The new Rome, as it is ultimately called.
Still exists today.
It becomes the capital of the Eastern Empire. And in many ways, it's a wealthier city than Rome.
Yeah.
Rome itself ceases to be the capital of the Western Empire.
It's new, right? That's like saying, is New York a wealthier city than London? Well, yeah, but that's because London sent people over, and that was their big hub for all of that empire that England had. So yeah, New York became that eventually, but well, of course, right? Like that's just the way that would work. When you start funneling money and trade through a central hub to get it over to a whole other area, that central hub will grow exponentially. Oh my gosh. I mean, because it is artificially being boosted and inflated on top of already naturally being a good trading hub. So yeah, you're going to turn it into a mecca.
Rome is something like Disneyland. It's a place that people respect. It's a university town in a way. But the real capital of the Western Empire is first Milan in Italy, and then Ravenna in Italy. Milan is a base for the land army. Ravenna is a base for the Roman fleet. Also, for a time, the Roman Empire is governed from the city of Trier in Germany.
Oh
In
yeah,
the
I
Moselle
forgot
River
about
Valley
that
off the
period of
Rhine,
Roman
what's
history.
now
The
northwestern Germany. So the
purple
Western
of
Empire is
Trier.
governed more and
Yeah.
more from the frontiers, and Rome fades into the background.
And then that becomes the preemptive capital. That becomes the
why do you think it
main
was so
capital.
easy for German
And then
barbarians to
how does
march
that
into
change
Rome
the
and burn it
empire?
down?
Because the moment you change from
They
an
had
empire
fallen
with one
considerably.
central location where everything is
Right.
governed from into
Right.
almost three,
Yeah.
that must change practically everything, doesn't it?
Well, not everything,
when
but
you
a
don't have
lot. It means
communications the
there
way we
is
do
a
now.
giant sucking sound of money and power going to the east. Because Constantinople, Milan and Ravenna are military bases as well as cities. Constantinople is not just a military base, it's a magnificent city. And also, it has the best fortification walls in the world, and it has a fantastic location, on a peninsula.
Constantinople lasted for so long. The Holy Roman Empire took forever to fall. The people who ultimately did it were the Arabs, and not the Arabs that you would think of. I'm talking like very modern level of Arabs. I'm talking about the people who created the system of mathematics that we still use today across the world. Those are the people that were able to sack Constantinople, and they did it with technology, because the walls, like he said, Constantinople is in a really unique location. You can really only invade it by land through one gate, and they had it locked down in the port. Like, the port is so easily defendable. The whole idea of the metal chain mesh that won't allow boats to pass through, they had that. They had a locked down city. It's very true. I'm glad he brought that up, because it's hard to even really put it into words. Like, Constantinople they chose that place. That was we're going to turn this into the new greatest city in the world. And it would have stood as the greatest city in the world forever had they probably just surrendered to the Arabs and not allowed the city to be sacked the way that it was. A lot of the wealth probably would have maintained inside the city. They could have tried to integrate into the Arab Empire, and it would have been one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful city in that empire. But the Holy Roman Empire was certainly very proud of all things, so they were not going to do that.
Peninsula on the edge of Europe with Asia across the way. It's very defensible, and nobody takes it for almost 1,000 years after it's founded.
Yep, it's incredible. I mean, I really can't stress enough. Like, I could probably show you guys a couple pictures of this. Like, it is incredible how good it is. Very, very impressive defensive position.
And so, when did that empire begin to degrade and fall?
The Eastern Empire.
The Eastern Empire.
Okay, so the Western Empire
river that can allow you
falls in the year 476 AD.
Continue that trade
The
route.
Eastern Empire continues
So many different
in one way or
aspects that make
another
it
for
very
almost 1,000 years. Constantinople isn't finally defeated until the year 1453, when the Ottoman Turks.
Do you hear that? I'm sorry. It was the Ottomans. It was the Ottomans, not the Arabs. They invented a series of technology that was incredible. They had a cannon that was like the size of a building. It broke after they shot it like 3 times and it broke, but they were able to destroy part of the wall with it. Like, they were doing crazy stuff. But isn't that crazy? It's 2025. That was like 500 years ago. That's not that long. Like, in the grand scheme of human history, if we're talking the last 4,000 years, really when things get heated in ancient Egypt, like, if we're looking at the last 4,000 years, it's only 500 years ago that the remnant of the Roman Empire, the true power of Rome that survived its fall, finally died. That's why people still talk about Rome to this day, because it still echoes in our history today.
Conquer the city. However, the Eastern Empire remains a big empire for about 150 years after 476. New people come in and they conquer a lot of it, and that is the Arabs. the Islamic conquest conquers most of what had been the Eastern Roman Empire. And the Byzantine Empire, as we call it, is reduced mostly to what's now Turkey, Anatolia, and part of what's now Bulgaria and Greece, and some of the islands as well.
Wait, let me look this. So are the Ottomans the Arabs? Is that just what the Arabs called themselves back then? Yes. Yes. Essentially, yes. Not exactly what we would refer to as Arab today, and it wasn't in only Arabic, but the Ottoman Empire was yes. They are the Arabic culture that created the mathematics and everything. I was correct. I just wasn't using the exact preferential term of what their empire was called at the time, which is the Ottoman Empire. Which makes sense because they were more than Arabs.
But they're very well organized. They really are the heirs of the Romans, and they hang on, as I said, for almost 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire.
Barry, in terms of Christianity, coming back to this discussion, how does it happen that these people who throw the early Christians to the lions and suppress them by any means they possibly can, then adopt this religion as the state religion? Because I imagine...
Are you confused why the Jews became Christians after they killed Jesus? Yeah, people have been asking that question for a long time, Constantine. A long time. Man, I'm really curious to hear what this guy's going to have to say, but it's a very complicated answer, obviously. It was, and that's the thing you got to keep in mind. It was like 200, 300 years after the death of Jesus when Constantine was emperor, and he decided to make the Roman Empire Christian. And there is debate whether or not Constantine was even Christian in his life, or if he was just, he saw the way the winds were blowing and he realized that that was the right move going forward for the empire. I mean, he was a good emperor for the most part. Like he understood things. He knew what was going on. You know, he wasn't an idiot. So I could definitely see Constantine being a pagan that was like, early in his life, oh, maybe I should probably be a Christian. It's probably the right thing to do.
Emperor Constantine, great, but I imagine by the time he says this is what we're doing, there's quite an upswell already of whatever.
Yeah, we don't know how many Christians there were, but you're right. Christianity has spread quite a bit. Some people would say 10% of the empire. Some people would say 30% of the empire. Certainly not the majority, but we don't know. But there are a lot of Christians, and they're in strategic places. The Roman elite is divided. They've concluded, after all the problems they have, they concluded that the gods are no longer on their side, and they need to do something. And the first thing they do is they create a worship of the sun, the sun. They worship the sun as a god. And the next thing they do is to say, we want to double down on the old gods. We want to revive the cult of Jupiter, the chief god of Rome. And while we're at it, they say, you know why the gods don't like us anymore? It's because we have these atheists who live among us. We have these people who don't believe in the gods. They think there's only one God. So the Christians. And so they turn on the Christians. And the emperor before Constantine, a man named Diocletian, undertakes the great persecution of the Christians when he tries to wipe out the church. It doesn't go as he had planned. It turns out, although some Christians do recant and they accept the pagan gods again, there are a lot of martyrs. And as the saying goes, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. The martyrs impress people that this church ain't going anywhere. And these people really believe. So after Diocletian, there's another civil war or two, and Constantine comes to the throne. Before he conquers the city of Rome, he has accepted Christianity as his religion. And the famous battle that he takes Rome, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, a bridge north of the city over the Tiber, he sees a vision. He sees a vision of the cross in the sky, and it says, "In this sign you shall conquer." And so when he becomes emperor, for the first time in Roman history, not only are the Christians not persecuted, but they are supported by the emperor and his taxes. And now Constantine's building churches. He builds the Church of St. John Lateran, which is still the basilica of the city of Rome. He builds St. Peter's. He builds a variety of churches. He sends his mother, Helena, Saint Helena for most Christians. He sends her to what is then Palestine, the Holy Land, to find the places where Jesus walked and where the apostles walked, and to build churches there, and to try to convert the Jews who are still there and the pagans who are there into Christianity, and to encourage monks to move to the Holy Land and set up shop there. And he closes pagan temples, or he doesn't close them so much as he takes away public support from them. We're not giving you any tax money anymore. You want to sacrifice expensive bulls? That's your problem, buddy. But you're not going to get any money from the Roman
them fall apart on their own.
Yeah, and so quickly, people begin to convert to Christianity.
I wouldn't even think.
And why is Constantine himself? Is he just a true believer, and this is why he's doing it, or are there a political and
I don't even think Constantine.
I think that all of the above. I mean, Constantine is a very powerful man. He's a politician. He's a warrior. He can be very violent. And
he was an emperor. Like,
why he becomes a Christian?
Constantine was, when you think of a Caesar, you're thinking of Constantine. Let's just put it out there. Like, he is such a good example of what people associate with a Roman emperor. Personally, as a guy that likes history, I like to think of a Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, more than anyone else, but that is more of a anomaly than the standard. If you're trying to think of the standard Roman empire, like, that's Constantine. Like, he was the best. He was the man. It was really him and Caesar had the biggest impacts that we still feel to this day from. I don't know. I struggle to say. I want to say positively, but I don't know if I can really say that the things that Caesar did and Constantine did were actually positive for the world. Maybe for the time they were positive. They were positive for Rome at the time. And I think that's really a good way to describe a Roman emperor. Somebody who is willing to do the horrible things, the hard things, if that's what he thinks will be the best for the empire. So.
I think his mother was a Christian. Christian tradition is that Constantine can.
What? Constantine's mother was a Christian? So he didn't send her to get converted? Like, did she convert him? Did Helena convert Constantine? Yep, I'm not the only one who's asked that question. She is not directly and provably considered having converted him, but there is some evidence to support the idea that she would have been a large reason why they converted to Christianity. That is very interesting. Well, it makes sense why she's a saint, doesn't it? It makes a lot of sense why Helena would be a saint.
Converts to Christianity, and his mother then converts after him.
What if you can create your own website by saying, this is what I want? With Wix, you can.
I would argue, probably. No, I don't.
First up,
obviously, I'm not sure if it's even.
But they're ancient sources.
But I would make the argument that it's very possible if Helena is one of the people that's sort of born and raised Christian, marries into this family, and then gives birth to the new emperor. And then, father is no longer in the picture because obviously he's, Constantine's the new emperor. And now she's voicing his ear like, hey, have you looked into Christianity? I know we're not Christians, but we could be. Look into it. That's probably how that went down. Maybe something she believed when she was a child. But at the time, Rome was not a Christian state. So it would have been weird for the emperor or really anybody up there to be Christian. I mean, there were certain people who were kind of openly Christian in senatorial seats, positions of power, but definitely not the emperor and his royal family. So that makes a lot of sense. That could be very interesting.
Versus to say otherwise, and that his mother was Christian first. his father, we know, was friendly to Christians. He was not a Christian himself. There seems to be some family background for this. Constantine sees, I believe it's an eclipse of the sun. If maybe not an eclipse of the sun, but it's a solar phenomenon. I'm afraid I don't remember the scientific term, but the sun does funny things. And he says, I went and asked the priest to explain what was going on, and they couldn't answer it for me. The only people who could, the pagan priests, that is, the only people who would explain it to my satisfaction were the Christian priests. And he says that's one of the reasons he becomes a Christian. And the sun is really important because, as I said, an earlier emperor had tried to establish the worship of the sun. Constantine's father was a worshiper of the sun. He was a general very high in the service of this earlier emperor. So Constantine is saying, in a way, the sun hasn't saved Rome. So maybe the Son of Man, if you will save Rome. Maybe Christianity will save Rome.
And why
I didn't know that.
Christianity, which we now, most people would conceive it to be a religion of compassion and mercy and the meek and all of that stuff. You mentioned that actually it was a very warrior religion at the time.
It was both. It's a really great question. It wasn't just a fighting faith, although it was a fighting faith.
Do they know Christian history?
But Christianity, like most religions, was extremely flexible.
Wow.
Christianity arose in opposition to a lot in the Roman world. After all, Jesus was crucified by the Romans, and St. Paul,
they were getting
Peter are killed by the Romans, and the Christians are in trouble with the Roman state in big ways from early on. But by the time of Constantine, Christianity had become Romanized, and Christian intellectuals, Christian thinkers, had to a certain extent made their peace with Rome. If you would have looked for Christians in Roman society before the conversion of Constantine, you would have had a hard time finding them because they looked like everybody else. They dressed like Romans, talked and acted like Romans.
Yeah, absolutely.
They just didn't go to the temples, and they met mostly in private houses because by and large churches were illegal. One of the appeals of Christianity was Christian charity. So Christians would love each other, as they said, and this was quite appealing to many people.
Did say that.
That doesn't go away. That's still part of it. But what's not a part of Christianity in the Roman Empire is turn the other cheek. They're still Romans. They're not going to turn the other cheek. One of the reasons for Christianity's success is that it makes these compromises. And you can imagine why Christians might say, we can't have everything that we want, but we don't live in a perfect world. We live in the real world. So maybe we have to be warlike, and maybe we have to have soldiers, but we can also do good deeds. We can also have charity. We can also spread the faith.
Back when we launched our first bit of trigonometry merch, we thought we could manage the shipping ourselves.
Intriguing.
Let's just say the local post office staff knew us by name, and not in a good way. If you're running a business, or even just starting one, you quickly realize how fast things can spiral. That's where ShipStation comes in. ShipStation is a shipping software that makes managing online orders simple, fast, and scalable. It brings all your orders 8% off shipping rates. That's serious savings you can reinvest into your business. Calm the chaos of order fulfillment with the shipping software that delivers. Switch to ShipStation today.
Do you see the little statue? Is that a stormtrooper? A little stormtrooper right there? I think that might be. I am a Star Wars fan myself. So I appreciate.
Go to ShipStation.com and use code TRIGGER to sign up for your free trial. That's ShipStation.com, code TRIGGER. Right. There's no tea in this. I mean, look at that. I'm not.
It's complicated, but it works.
So it's pragmatic. And staying on the theme of Christianity, we have the Christian church in Rome, which I associate with Catholicism, and then we have Christianity in Constantinople, which I associate with the Orthodox Church. Correct me if I'm wrong and I'm being silly. Is that accurate, that there's two forms of Christianity being practiced in both of these cities?
Yes and no. There are many forms of Christianity, and as soon as you get Christianity, you get Christian heresies. We don't have the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church yet. That comes later. The Bishop of Rome.
The orthodoxy can't exist if this is a beginning, right? Because the whole idea of an orthodoxy is like we're going to return to the old school values. You can't say, hey, for the first time ever, we're going to be a Christian society. And then there are people who are like, you know what? We should return to the old ways of Christianity. Like, yeah, obviously that's not possible until you get to a point where the values that the religion represent no longer match what the religion represented at this time period. This would be the time period the Orthodoxy is probably talking about.
Does have a certain authority. And the Bishop of Rome is very important in turning back Attila the Hun. I mean, there are many stories about that.
Yeah.
But the papacy, as we come to know it, is still in its formative stages in this period. Likewise, the Orthodox Church is still very much in its formative stages.
We're going to have to do an Attila the Hun.
But there are a variety of heresies. There is a Christian thinker, I believe a monk from Egypt named Arius, who had a view that eventually becomes heretical. Don't ask me what it was because I've forgotten. But many barbarians, when converted to Christianity, are converted to Arian Christianity. By the way, it has nothing to do with the Aryans and the Nazis. It's named after a guy named Arianus. So there are all these disagreements. And even in the East, when the Eastern Empire survives, there are those who insist that Jesus was only of one nature, not of two natures. And they don't believe in the Trinity in the same way that people do in Constantinople. And there's huge disagreement, bad blood between the different groups in Christianity.
But this must have destabilized the empire, because what you're now introducing is essentially potentially the beginnings of a religious civil war, like we see with the Sunni and the Shias in Islam.
Yes, but I would maintain that it doesn't destabilize them to the point where the Romans are incapable of fighting the barbarians. I think the reason the Roman Empire, I basically buy the military explanation for the fall of the Roman Empire. And behind the military explanation, the political, economic, and social and cultural factors that made the Roman army unable to deal with the task. I don't think religion played a very big role.
And I completely agree with that. Just to touch on for a second, what he's alluding to. So if you're going to look at the military reasons why the Rome fell, let's take a look at it from a perspective of this. Okay, so the heart of the empire is getting lazy, it's getting fat and happy, it's enjoying the spoils of war. So all of a sudden the heart of the empire is no longer producing young men who are wanting to dedicate their lives to military service. It used to be a point where every single man would have to serve in the military, sort of like Israel does, and that changed. But it got to a point where they were just sort of like not producing the number of soldiers that they had used to. So now with all these Germans coming in, they invited these Germans in and said, okay, hey, we're having a recruitment problem. Why don't we take a lot of these Germans who are fleeing the Huns and asking for Roman citizenship, and we'll give that to them if they join our army. So a lot of these people, so the army starts to get to a point where a large portion of it is actually Germanic barbarians who are trained in Roman tactics. That is a very dangerous thing to do. Maybe at the time it wasn't considered a dangerous thing to do, but because of the fall of Rome, we now understand just how dangerous that can be. A lot of people have had this idea throughout history, but no one's really implemented it quite the way the Romans did. You want immigration? You want to immigrate into our country? You can. You're going to join the military. All that really does, at least in terms of Roman history, is train these people who don't care about your country in your own tactics. And now that they're rebelling against you because of taxation, they're not getting the same representation in their rights, they're very upset. They now know how you fight. They know what you do. They know if they push you on the western side when they're on the hill, they know your retreat strategy is going to be to make 2 different retreats, one of which is a false retreat and one is the real retreat. They know these tactics now. So now they know where to cut you off. That you can't retreat. Like, they know how to get through your shield wall. And you've given them tools. Now they have the metals necessary. They have armor. And every battle that they win, they pick up more resources and more armor and more weapons. And they free more enslaved barbarians. It just grew and grew and grew. So I completely understand the military reasoning for it. I think he hit on a really interesting point, though, which is you have to keep in mind the vast majority of Rome's military force wasn't even in Rome at the point when Rome fell. Rome was already in decline and had been in decline for a while. It's interesting. He said Rome was sort of Disney World for the Roman Empire. It was where people went for like a day to do a bunch of attractions and spend money. And I think I've never heard that before, but I really like it. And I think it's a really good representation of what Rome had become towards the end of it. Sort of that gleaming, beautiful city that is just, it's a tourist trap. It's really all it is. The military power is not there. The government power is not there. It's not even the biggest city in the empire anymore. So I think it's important to keep all those factors in mind. He didn't really go into that, but I think if you want to understand what he's talking about there, that's what he's referencing.
Prime among this, from what I understood, and correct me, is that you're not actually saying the Romans.
How am I already underwater?
I'm in the same boat.
I'm in an actual boat because I've been using Grammarly's AI for years to keep me high and dry.
Got worse at fighting, but what happened is because the concept of citizenship eroded,
yes,
people were far less committed to the country in which they lived, and therefore they wouldn't go and fight for it. Therefore, they had to get essentially outsiders to fight on their behalf.
Yeah,
and outsiders will never fight for your land the way that people who actually live
there.
Yeah,
absolutely true. That's one factor. Another factor is
you're a German barbarian. And which, again, I actually really hate the term barbarian. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but I think it's an incredibly offensive term. And it is a Roman term that they use to refer to the Germans and the Celts. It's just a way to other them and make them lesser than you. And I think the Germans resented it at the time. And I think, honestly, people should still resent the fact that we called the Germans barbarians. It's not true. They were just people. They just weren't Romans. But people have sort of taken back the term barbarian now, and it's sort of a symbol of force and strength. But still, it makes me very upset that people think barbarian and they think stupid. And that's really, really offensive and not true at all when it comes to what those people were. That's exactly what Rome wanted. The fact that people to this day still hear the word barbarian and they think an idiot is exactly what Rome wanted. And it shows you just how good their marketing strategy really was. They were able to say, okay, we'll give you Roman citizenship, but you're barbarians. You're never going to be a true Roman. Even though you're going to have the citizenship, we're always going to other you. Always. And that is a lot of what led to the societal issues. You cannot other people. You just can't. It's going to happen naturally, but when you start artificially doing it, when you start putting people into lists and categories, you're just asking for trouble.
Is you have to pay professional soldiers.
Yeah.
And if the barbarians have come in and taken your land and you can't collect taxes to pay your professional soldiers, you got a problem. I would really contrast it to me like the opposite case is Britain in the Second World War. So here's Britain that goes on fighting against the Nazis when everyone else has surrendered. They're out of the game. The Brits are doing it alone. They have a whole of society effort. And it only works when you can mobilize all of society to do this. And again, I think the Soviets do the same thing. They can mobilize all of society. They do it, of course, in very different ways. The British
Let's take a moment to appreciate, because right now a lot of people in the left of America and Britain are trying to say that Winston Churchill was a bad person. And he's certainly a very complicated man, but a lot of people are trying to say that he was bad. I've heard the same things for FDR my entire life, and I will always admit that Franklin Delano Roosevelt absolutely did some really horrible things. He did put Japanese people in concentration camps. Winston Churchill created the smog crisis that impacted London through his sheer neglect and just disdain for the environmental agencies. So they're certainly not perfect people, but I think it's important to mention what he's talking about, because in a time of war, it is so important to have that idea of country, my fellow countrymen and my country, the idea of my country and what I'm willing to give my life for something that I believe is greater than me, that can outlast me. That's what he's talking about. Rome lost that. They were in the process of losing that all over the empire. The idea that we would die for Roman greatness. Let's take Winston Churchill is what he's talking about in World War II. He's talking about the fact that during over 100 days of being bombed all across Britain every single night, you never knew. You could die at any moment. Your best friend could die. And then you could wake up tomorrow and the house next to you is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And Winston Churchill said, "We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be." That was Britain. That was how they entered the hardest time in their entire nation's history. They had a leader that summed it up perfectly. We will fight everywhere. We will fight in the homeland of our greatest enemy, our nemesis. We will fight for France. That is amazing. To me, that's amazing, and it gets lost on people a lot. It really does. Just how powerful. Winston Churchill may not have been a perfect man, but he helped maintain national identity and national pride in the middle of a war that they were losing. Like, that is so hard to do.
British aren't shooting a lot of people for not going up to the front. The Romans can't do that anymore. They have this new challenge. The barbarians have gotten better, much better than they ever were before. And the barbarians have even more. Why?
Yeah.
They learn how to fight from the Romans, and they, as I said, they start out in 50 tribes. It's not so difficult to defeat 50 tribes. Divide and conquer is the principle the Romans always follow. But what if you now have 4 tribes? That's it. And they're organized, they're grouped together, and they've learned to fight, because many of them have fought in the Roman armies all their lives. And they're looking across the Rhine River and they're saying, it's pretty rich and soft over there. The pickings look good. Yeah, but the Romans still have a professional army. It's not so easy. But then, oops,
I forgot about
here come the
Vandals
Huns
and the Ostrogoths
from Central Asia, and they're really barbarians. They make the German tribes look kind of peaceful. They're pushing them across, and these German tribes said, we're crossing the Rhine, we're crossing the Danube, we're getting into Roman territory. We don't care who we have to kill, because now we're pretty good at fighting. And now we can take on the big boys. We can take on the Roman army.
Probably more than that.
And now, if you're the Roman government, what are you going to do?
You're now surrounded by 7 different.
Call on the loyalty of your people in a way that Rome could have in an earlier period.
So, what would you say, if such a question is reasonable, are like warning signs that an empire or civilization is starting to trend in the wrong direction? What would you see?
I would say we have these warning signs today. When you have a society in which the concept of citizenship fades, when you have a society in which an earlier generation, young people were taught civics as they were in the United States, but now they're not taught it anymore. When you have a society in which young people were taught their country was good and they should be loyal and serve it. You know, when I was growing up in the US, we had to say the Pledge of Allegiance every day in the classroom. But when you have a society when that's gone and when it's not cool to do that, I think you're in trouble. I think that's a sign of society that's in trouble and is going to have a hard time being
We have major
resilient. We have a
sports players
society
that
that
they
trashes
don't
its
even stand
institutions.
for our national anthem
And
anymore.
when you have a society where you
That
don't have
is
strong
such an
leadership,
indicator of our
then
weakness
you're in real
as a
trouble.
culture.
The Romans had all those problems. They had these warning signs. It works fine until, well, it maybe not fine, but it works until somebody outside comes along and says, you know what, I think I'm going to conquer you. And we have that now. China. China is aiming at the United States. Maybe they don't want to conquer us, but it sure looks like they want to conquer us. And
why throw America off its pedestal, maybe, but conquer, really?
Okay, maybe not.
Yeah, I would.
Maybe not occupied.
Okay, well, to Constantine's point, like, yes, conquering isn't what, like, China does not want to land invade the United States of America. China does not want to make America China. Absolutely not. Like, that is so not what they want. Like, no. But they want to destabilize our foundation so we fall and they can absorb the power vacuum. Everyone in the world knows what is the second most powerful country in the world right now, and it's China. So no, well, things aren't fought the way that they used to be fought. You know, we don't fight wars on just land anymore, or sea, or sky. We don't actually even have to physically fight. A lot of it can happen with information. A lot of it can happen financially. The globalized economy has created such a situation that an invasion, a conquering of another society, doesn't even have to involve military troops anymore. You can stranglehold a society economically, and they are at your mercy. That is all because of our intense communication networks. We are able to communicate in a way we never used to. Whereas if you wanted to rule an empire, you needed to sort of create a governorship so that governor could communicate with the central empire, and you could create that network of communication. And that's why empires worked so well, is they would sort of cerebrally create a communication network. You don't need that anymore. So now everybody is more like, let's just get what land we can. Not that there's much to go by anymore, but Taiwan is something China wants. Ukraine is something Russia wants. There's various examples like that. So people do want to grab up what little land remains for resources, but most of the warfare that's being fought these days is actually happening informationally. And so I actually agree with him. I think China does want to conquer us, but the term conquering when it comes to war is not what it used to mean. It doesn't mean the same thing anymore.
The United States, but definitely knock it off its pedestal, definitely drive the United States out of the Western Pacific. And they're doing it in ways that are very threatening to the United States. The Chinese are very good at war. The Chinese way of war. Is this too off topic?
No, we love it.
Okay.
No, this is right on topic. This is where our audience have woken up.
Yeah. So the Chinese,
finally, another video about the collapse of the West. Excellent.
That Chinese way of war is based on the writings of Sun Tzu. If you haven't read Sun Tzu, everybody should read Sun Tzu. It's a great and important book. And Sun Tzu says,
the art of war.
The art of war. War is the art of deception. Deception is at the height of warfare. He also says that the greatest victory is not crushing your enemy. He's not Conan the Barbarian. The greatest victory is getting your enemy to surrender without you fighting a blow. Now that's kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. And it's not as if deception isn't something that we have in the West, but it's never been essential to the Western way of war as it is to the Chinese way of war. You familiar with the book Unrestricted Warfare?
No.
Oh, I got to read it. It's available online for free. It's a book that was written by two Chinese colonels, I believe in 1999, but in the late 1990s. And it basically says we're at war with the West. And the way to win this war is there are no limits. and we have to subvert them from inside. It's not a matter of attacking them frontally, although eventually we'll be able to do that. But it's a matter of subverting them, subverting their institutions, subverting their culture. And this is the Chinese way of war.
Oh
It's a
man,
big
they're
part
gonna
of the
try to
Chinese way
collapse
of
us
war.
like
And
Rome.
this is the challenge that
That
faces
is
the West, and
topic.
particularly America today.
So it's a process of demoralization.
Yes.
Which is what Yuri Bezmenov talked about, who was a Soviet defector who basically made all those very same points. So that's what the KGB was doing.
Yes, I mean, the Russians were and are very good at this. As you know, Russia has no natural boundaries, at least not in the West. And so for many centuries, they've used propaganda and they've used head games as a way of getting themselves a boundary. Maskirovka is something they talk about a lot. Camouflage. That's a very big part of the Russian way of war.
You know, when you talk, Barry, I was reading about this stat, about this, I can't quote the exact numbers, but the percentage of young people who are willing to go to war for their countries in the West are dismally low.
Yeah, I think it's even lower in Britain than it is in the United States. But it's low. It's low in both places. I mean, for me, the legacy, the central lesson of the classical world is citizenship and the importance of having a citizen state. You know, the Greeks and the Romans don't invent the city-state. The Phoenicians had that. The Sumerians had that. But they do invent the citizen state. And that is a society in which there's a notion of citizenship, and there's a notion that the citizens have a stake in the society, and they're willing to give something back to their society. And that's what the Romans lose. And as I said, they can survive without that. Until really bad times come, and really bad times came. And then they were shooting blanks. They didn't have what you needed in order to survive.
So let's say I had the power vested upon me by the United States. I crowned you.
Please, dear God, no.
Listen, I'd make it great again. But I anoint you Emperor Barry Strauss.
Yes.
Using the lessons that we have learned from the ancient world, what would you do to the United States, or what would you suggest policy-wise that could prevent us from going down this particular path?
Well, I think we want to reintroduce the idea of citizenship. I mean, I do a lot of the things that we've talked about at this conference, the ARC conference. But
you know, I'm an Eagle Scout. When I was getting that award, now obviously the Boy Scouts of America don't exist anymore. They have changed their name. They are now just the Scouts of America, and it's not gendered anymore, even though that is a whole other topic. There were 3 merit badges, many that are required to become an Eagle Scout, but 3 that I want to talk about. There is citizenship badges. There's 3 of them. There's citizenship in your community, citizenship in your state, and citizenship in your nation. And all 3 are important, and they all talk about the different levels of citizenship and how involved you can be in your community or your state or your nation. I'm not sure that these types of values and these things that I grew up learning about are actually taught anymore. I don't think people are learning about the importance of citizenship anymore, and really what that even means.
I just attended. We'd want to absolutely revitalize the idea of citizenship. And we have to do it when they're young. Education is absolutely central to classical civilization and classical notions of citizenship. So you have to educate people in what, to me, was like not even controversial when I was growing up. Love your country.
Yeah.
Be patriotic.
Yeah.
Find out what's good about it. And certainly also learn its history and find out what's bad about it.
Too. The
but
things we need to
say that on balance,
overcome.
as I think anyone in a Western society should, we live in good countries. We live in countries that we should love. And as citizens, we have a stake in this society. And we have certain rights, but we also have certain responsibilities. I think we have to go back to that. We have to educate people that way. We can't go on. We won't survive if we have an educational system and a culture that says, we're bad, we're terrible, we're the worst ever. They're victims. We've done it. We're bad. We deserve to do penance. And if we're going to be conquered by outsiders, so be it. because we deserve it. They don't really mean that. They have no idea what they're talking about.
Yes.
But that's the road on which I think societies that give up believing in themselves, that's the danger that they're exposing.
Well, and that's the big issue.
It's really
a lot of
fascinating.
people in this country right now is they do have this immense guilt. They look at our history and they don't look at the good. They don't look at how we helped the world, towards a better path. All they look at is the negative things that we've done and draw the conclusion that we're terrible as a result of that. And I just can't understand that. It seems like the propaganda worked, is all that I really get. When people say that they hate men or that they hate our government or whatever silly slogan, that is so clearly propaganda.
Talk about rights and responsibilities, because it seems to me that everybody always wants to talk about their rights. This is my right. Don't do that. Now I have the right to this. Very few people talk about the other side of the coin, which is responsibility. So let's focus on that.
Yeah.
What do we mean by that?
Well, so for example, in classical Athens, in Athenian democracy, one of the mottos was, in Athens, we don't say that people who don't take part in public life are minding their own business. We say they have no business being there at all. Do you know what the ancient Greek word for somebody who doesn't take part in public life is? Idiot.
Write that down. Hold on a second. So in Athens, they would say people who are minding their own. What is it? What exactly that was a good quote.
It's really fascinating. You talk about rights and responsibilities, because it seems to me that everybody always wants to talk about their rights. This is my right. Don't do that. Now I have the right to this. Very few people talk about the other side of the coin, which is responsibility. So let's focus on that.
Yeah.
What do we mean by that?
Well, so for example, in classical Athens, in Athenian democracy, one of the mottos was, in Athens, we don't say that people who don't take part in public life are minding their own business.
In Athens, we don't say people who aren't taking part in. It's a good quote.
It's really fascinating. You talk about rights and responsibilities, because it seems to me that everybody always wants to talk about their rights. This is my right. Don't do that. Now I have the right to this. Very few people talk about the other side of the coin, which is responsibility. So let's focus on that.
Yeah.
What do we mean by that?
Well, so for example, in classical Athens, in Athenian democracy, one of the mottos was, in Athens, we don't say that people who don't take part in public life are minding. Minding their own business. We say they have no business being there at all. Do you know what the ancient Greek word for somebody who doesn't take part in public life is?
This is fascinating.
Idiot. That's idiotes. Idiotes is somebody who is not a citizen, who does not take citizen responsibility seriously. So the ancients didn't really have a developed notion of the rights of citizens. It was mostly the privileges of citizens and the responsibilities of citizens. For the Greeks in particular, citizenship was, in a way, it's analogous to our idea of owning stock in a company. If you are a citizen of Athens, you have a share in Athens. They actually talked in that use that language. You have a share in Athens, and as part of your
bathroom. right, let's finish this.
Share, you have to do your duty. So,
today we're covering how to take control of your credit. Let's start by downloading the Experian app.
How do I decide between all the credit cards out there?
Well, Experian matches you with credit cards.
Can I play devil's advocate a little bit, Barry?
Please.
I'm curious, just thinking through this logically firsthand, so, from first impression, so it could be totally off base. But isn't that really the problem with Christianity? Because Christianity says you're made in the image of God, you have value and worth by virtue of the fact that you're human. You are endowed with these inalienable rights by your creator.
Right.
And we seem to have a society in which we really do practice that. Like, you're born, therefore you have a whole bunch of rights and a bunch of things you're entitled to, and you're entitled to, healthcare and food and shelter and all of these things, which goes completely at odds with what you're talking about, which is your rights ultimately do come from your responsibilities. These two things are matched. And so you don't get stuff until you do stuff.
That's a great question. I don't think that Christianity says that you're entitled to health care or all these goodies. One of the reasons the West has succeeded is that in the Middle Ages, in Western Europe, they developed a notion of the separation of church and state. It's been said by some really great historians that in a way, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was good news in the long term, because what it meant was there was no longer a central authority, but rather there were a series of these small, petty states. And the only reason culture survived in these barbarian states is because of the church, beginning with the monasteries, and then later on in more open church institutions.
They
such
call
as the university.
it the Dark Ages after Rome fell for a reason. We lost a lot of knowledge.
The
we lost
church leadership and the secular leadership were at each other's throats. And that turned out to be a really good thing because it created space. It created space. It didn't allow either one of them to become supreme. And citizenship and the rights of individuals kind of sneaks in between the church and the state. I mean, one of the things that Christianity does give is it gives the idea of human dignity. And this gets from Judaism, of course, the idea that human beings are created in the image of God. That's what it says in the beginning of Genesis. The Greeks and Romans didn't believe in human dignity. In Latin, the word dignitas, dignity means rank or station in society. Julius Caesar, when asked why he's going to go to civil war,
be careful, man, you're going to start making everybody realize how incredible America is.
It's because my dignitas is dearer to me than life itself. My rank is dearer to me than life itself. It's not a notion of human dignity. But Christianity takes this notion from Judaism and it spreads it to everyone in the Roman Empire and ultimately to all mankind. So people have inalienable rights. But those, actually the Declaration says unalienable rights, but we say inalienable now. Those rights, as the Declaration goes on to say, are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are real rights, but they're also kind of limited rights. And so from this conflict of church and state, ultimately the notion of limited government comes out. And so citizens have responsibilities to their government, but they also have responsibilities to their God. And those responsibilities are pre-citizen. They're separate from being a citizen. And ultimately, they're more important than being a citizen. But I think what's good about the West is that we have a balance,
Well, speaking of balance, my other devil's advocate question.
I've actually heard it said a lot that the way that it used to be in this country. So like nowadays, for example, you have somebody whose kid gets sick and they can't afford to pay for it. A lot of times nowadays, people will try to get the government to give them assistance, or they'll actually do some kind of community funding, but they'll do like a Kickstarter or something like that. Whereas in the past, there never used to be any compunction on the idea that the government would have anything to do with helping you. Limited government was what we founded this country on. We founded America on the idea that the England governed too much and they were too involved in our lives and they overstepped. We needed a government that only involved themselves if they had to be. So if you had a situation like that, you would never even think for a second, oh, I need to try to get some kind of aid from the government. You would think, I need to go to my church. I need to talk to my priest. And then the priest and me, we're going to talk to the congregation. And we're going to let everybody know that this is what we're struggling with and this is what we're going through. And you would actually have your community support you. Mental health, there's a lot of evidence that that type of interaction is incredibly mentally healthy for humans, and that it has long-term impacts on our feeling of security. And we just don't have those kind of community interactions anymore, especially in the major cities. Everybody's very siloed. And some people, they don't even have a family structure that they can fall back on either. So it's definitely a different situation. It's definitely a different societal expectation. I think that's a little bit of what he's getting at here.
Question was going to be.
I love devils.
Well, I guess with my Russian background, I'm always trying ideas on in my head as I listen to them. And as you well know, I agree with you about the greatness of the West and the importance to teach children correctly about that. And then I also think about what's happening in Russia today, where a historian like you isn't allowed to investigate or research certain things about Russian, well, particularly Soviet history. The gulags and all of that is the crimes of Stalin are covered up. And in fact, now there are lots of people who think that he was a great guy, who did lots of great things. The huge atrocities that the Soviet Union committed in World War II. Now, look, without the Soviet Union, I think it's very clear that we don't win World War II. And so the sacrifices that were made by my ancestors, among others, were hugely valuable. That does not.
That is an episode I would love to do, because it's just not talked about in the West. We never talk about the actual impact of the Soviet Union on World War II. All you ever hear about, really, when it comes to World War II, from the Western perspective, is we dropped 2 bombs on Japan and we stormed the beaches of Normandy. That's all you ever hear about. I would actually wager to say that there are a vast majority of young people in our country that don't even know that we invaded Africa during World War II. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think that there is a large percentage of people that do not even know that. Not let alone why we did it, who was fighting there. We fought the Italians, by the way. They had already invaded, and they were in control of the oil fields and sending the oil up to the Nazis for the Luftwaffe and the tanks. So it was very strategic why they did it and why we invaded. But a lot of people, I don't even think they understand a lot of these core concepts. So the idea that they even understand what Russia went through during World War II, why Russia responded to everything the way that they did, I think that's a whole other video. That's a very rich topic. I don't think a lot of people really fully understand here in the West.
Eradicate the terrible atrocities that also happened that we should be able to talk about. But in Russia, all of this is prevented from being talked about. So how do we balance our desire to give our children a clear-eyed view of our history with also avoiding that trap of becoming these militaristic, nationalistic people who think they've been perfect their entire history?
Yeah, well, great question. But of course, the Russians have a very different heritage than Western Europe does. They didn't have the separation of church and state. They didn't have this space where individual freedom and liberty could develop. I mean, we want our children, the other value that we have to give them is freedom of speech. And in the ancient republics, the ancient city-states, this was absolutely essential. Freedom of speech. And that's another thing that fades under the emperors.
Yeah, I've been seeing this 2 game. People have been streaming it, and immediately people are liking it. I'm pretty into Rivals right now, man. I'm not gonna lie, it looks pretty good. My girlfriend loves sniping, so she might enjoy it.
Freedom of speech is taken away from the Romans bit by bit. There is no freedom of speech in Russia. There's limited freedom of speech in the Russian tradition. Maybe ironically, it was at its height in the late Tsarist Empire. Even then, it wasn't complete. There was a secret police, et cetera, and so forth. But I think we have to teach our children about the West, about its achievements, about this balance, and about the classical heritage. And we should also teach them it's very fragile. It's very precious.
Very
I guess it was
new.
Ronald Reagan who said something like, freedom is
really
always only one generation away from being lost. And I think that's absolutely true. You can't have a citizen society. You can't have a republic without educating the young. And one of the terrible things that's happened in the United States in the last 40 years is that education has been taken over by people who don't believe in the country's good and who don't believe in freedom of speech in the same way. I mean, I think they should be absolutely allowed to have their opinions. I think it's great that we have a clash of opinions.
In the class.
But we have to be very careful what we teach the youngest children.
Crazy.
And I think it's very dangerous to take the youngest children and just expose them to propagandas and expose them to woke ideas. I think we want to build them up slowly to where they have the freedom of speech and thought, where they can judge for themselves. I never want my students to mouth the party line back to me. How boring is that? I want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and to be able to have the strength of mind to do that. And to do that, they need to learn about the Western heritage.
There's probably a millennial or a Gen Z, and they're listening to this on the bus or on the subway or whatever, and you're talking, and you mentioned about having a stake, the Greeks talking about having a stake in the city.
Right.
And for a lot of young people and people in our societies, they see having a stake in society as owning property. So they're probably thinking, well, I'm not being allowed to own a stake in society. Therefore, why should I believe it? Why should I believe it? They feel excluded. I think that's probably a big part of it as well.
I think it is. And I think here we have the problem that we talked about earlier, the concentration of wealth and the growing extremes between the rich and the poor. We have to have prosperity. It's very clear that in Athenian democracy, it was based on prosperity for the middle class. And the notion of citizenship, as it develops in Greece and then Rome, is based on the idea that you're going to have a solid middle class. And so if the middle class is threatened, I think that's the whole ballgame is threatened. So I'm really glad that you made that point.
Yeah.
And you know, we have to bring prosperity back.
Man, although he can be
Barry, it's been a superb interview. Thank you. We could do one of these every week, and we wouldn't run out of things to say. So thank you very much for coming back on the show. Final question is always the same. What's the one thing we're not talking about that we really should be?
You're not talking about my new book, which is this great and wonderful book that's going to be appearing in August 2025. Jews versus Rome, 2 centuries of rebellion against the world's mightiest empire. And these 2 centuries, from 63 BCE to 136 CE, are some of the most pivotal years in history. It's the years when the temple is destroyed, Jerusalem is destroyed, when Judaism retools, and when Christianity is born. Few things are more important than that. If you want to know where it came from.
A lot of people don't even know what he's talking about. The original temple, the original Jewish temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Islamic forces that took over the region. I could go into a whole video where I talk about why the Jews ended up spread around the world the way that they ended up, even though they started in the Middle East. It's a lot of different things that happened there. It's a really, really interesting topic, really fascinating. But yeah, they destroyed that temple. And then this has happened so many times in history. I cannot express to you enough how many times this happens religiously. A place gets taken over by a different culture, then they destroy that religion's big building and build their religion's big building on top of it. I don't know why, but I guess that's a very effective method. But that is what happened to the original Jewish temple, I believe. And I'd have to, verify that. It's been a while since I've looked into it, but I'm pretty sure that's what he's referencing, which is wild, right? And that like really shook the Jewish community around, Europe at the time and Africa, Northern Africa. Like it really shook them up. Because that's hard. That's hard. That'd be like Notre Dame burning down for Christians, even worse so probably.
From read my book, which is also a great read, if I do say so.
Sounds fascinating. I cannot wait to read it.
Thank you.
Also, I cannot wait to go to Substack where you get to ask Barry your questions. So follow us on over there right now.
What is your favorite what if moment from the Romans or Greeks? Are any particular stupid, drunken / horny moments that changed your history that you particularly enjoyed?
That actually be a good film check. Oh goodness. Well, I hope that you all enjoyed that. It was really, really cool for me to do this. I love talking about history. There's various different YouTube channels and videos that I'll probably be doing. I'll probably continue to try to do this somewhat consistently and just try to create a nice array of different history, video game, whatever topics, sports we can talk about. One of these days, maybe we're going to have to do it's over on that side. The St. Louis Blues. We're gonna have to do a rundown of the 2019 Stanley Cup. That would be fun to do. But thank you all for coming and enjoying this. And if you did, or just participating, I appreciate it. And I will see you all soon.